This encyclical comes at a critical moment in human history. The ecological crisis is essentially a spiritual problem. The sin against the environment, the ecological sin.
This is big for the Pope. Consume less and buy less. We have to really rethink our lifestyles.
He blames a lot of it on society's throwaway culture.
He tweeted out that the earth, our home, is beginning to look more and more like an immense pile of filth.
Immense pile of filth.
Pile of filth.
The encyclical Praise Be is the most important papal document ever on the environment, backing the science on climate change, blaming free markets, holding rich nations responsible. Environmentalists and many on the left are cheering.
Say it, but you know it's true. Good evening, everybody. It is an honor to be here at my last, and perhaps the last, White House Correspondents' Day. You all look great. The end of the Republic has never looked better.
In Revelation 17, we are seeing one last push for a despotic and monarchical government. The United States has been mapped out by these soon-to-be kings, and they intend to take away the rights of life, liberty, and property from the people, as we saw in parts 1 and 2 of this series. We read in Revelation 17 and verse 12 that the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings which have received no kingdom as yet, but received power as kings 1 hour with the beast. Just as power was given to the papacy to continue 1260 days, so too this kingdom will be given power for a short space. An important sign is given to know and understand that we are to leave the cities at this time. In the book of Matthew, chapter 24, we read in verse 3 that the disciples came to him privately saying, "Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming?" Imagine coming to a stop sign and not seeing the sign at a busy intersection. This sign is very important to understand. Jesus went on to tell the disciples that there would be wars, famines, diseases, earthquakes, but he said in verse 6 that the end is not yet. In other words, these are not the signs of the end. There is something still coming. He continued in verse 13 and 14 and said, "But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come." And then in verse 15, Jesus gives the sign that we are to see, know, and understand. Verse 15 reads, "When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand." When we see this, we are to know and understand. And then the next verse says to let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains, or in other words, get out of the cities, because just as Jerusalem was destroyed, so too will many of the cities at the end be filled with chaos shortly after the sign is given. The sign was given in AD 66, 3.5 years before the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. Time was given for the Christians to see the sign and get out of the city. In the book of Luke, we see this sign thus. Luke 21 verse 20. "And when you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto." This is another key to understanding this prophecy. When we understand all of these points, we will see this sign clearly in the book of Revelation chapters 12 and also chapter 17. The first point that we need to remember is that the church is a woman, and this woman has a name. In the book of Galatians, chapter 4 and verse 26, we read that her name is Jerusalem above, which is the mother of us all. In Hebrews 12 and verse 22 and 23, we are told that you are come unto Mount Zion, unto the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, the general assembly and church of the firstborn. The name of the church, which is scripturally the mother of all of the children of God, is Jerusalem, and is mentioned in Revelation 12 and contrasted with the woman in Revelation 17 and verse 3, which is called Babylon, the mother of harlots. In Revelation 12, the children of this mother are called the remnant of her seed, in other words, her remaining children. And notice what it says about her children. Revelation 12, verse 17. The dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Remember how in the book of Luke, Jesus said that we would see Jerusalem surrounded with armies? Here we see the woman surrounded by armies, making war with the woman. The 10 horns or 10 kings on the dragon being the kings of the earth, which are used to make war. But follow me here, there is more. Remember how Jesus likened these armies surrounding Jerusalem to the abomination of desolation. Notice what is said of the woman in Revelation 17. In Revelation chapter 17 and verse 16 we read that the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Shall make her desolate. The abomination that maketh desolate. Interestingly, Jerusalem was burned with fire because she played the harlot. In Leviticus 21 and verse 9, the daughter of the priest, if she is playing the harlot, was to be burned with fire. We read in verse 16 that the 10 horns make her desolate. And this is the abomination that makes her desolate. We are told that the 10 horns are 10 kings in verse 12. And in verse 2 we read the kings of the earth have committed fornication. And according to the book of Leviticus, this fornication is an abomination to God. In fact, it goes even further. In Revelation 12 and verse 5 we read that the dragon stood before the woman. Note the word stood before, and go with me now to the book of Leviticus chapter 18 and read in verse 22. It says, Thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is an abomination.
And just last week, speaking at the Women in the World Summit, Democratic 2016 contender Hillary Clinton said this about those who have religious convictions on social issues.
Deep-seated cultural codes, religious beliefs, and structural biases have to be changed.
And this abomination is now made a state law in America that the priest must marry 2 males or females. This is enforcing a religious law and a violation of the First Amendment. This is church and state. But yet, an even greater abomination is in the next verse. Verse 23, Neither shalt thou lie with any beast to defile thyself, neither shall any woman stand before a beast to lie down thereto. It is confusion. Remember the dragon stood before the woman? And here we read the woman stand before the beast. This is church and state. A woman and a beast, and the root word of confusion in this verse is the word Babel, which is where we get the word Babylon. This is the abomination that maketh desolate. Church and state. And what is happening in America? What kind of babble is coming out of the mouth of the beast? In Revelation chapter 13 and verse 11, we are told that this beast came up like a lamb and then would speak like a dragon. Why was it lamb-like when it came up? Because it had a constitution which was established upon the principles of liberty. And the Bible tells us in 2 Corinthians 3:17, where the Spirit of the Lord or the Lamb is, there is liberty. But the Spirit, we are told, would change. The Bible tells us in Luke chapter 6 and verse 46 that of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh. And if America is to speak like a dragon, it would have been coming from the heart of the nation, Washington, D.C. The very people who are to uphold the Constitution of the United States, the Congress of America, entertained this man last year as he pushed a global agenda for climate change and an encyclical which goes right along with Agenda 21 of the United Nations. The very next day on September 25th, Pope Francis was in New York City to speak with the United Nations and to promote his encyclical, and united his ideas with the Sustainable Development Agenda that the UN was promoting at the same time. The Sustainable Development Agenda involves a new socialist government where a few elite rule as kings, as spoken about in part 1 of this series, moving people into the cities and collecting on the debts of the middle class who own property in the country until eventually they have the entire countryside completely off limits. In Revelation 17 and verse 4, we are told that this woman is holding a golden cup in her hand full of abominations. In verse 6, we're given clarity as to what these abominations are. We read that it is the blood of martyrs and saints who were killed because of her fornication with the kings of the earth. These kings in verse 16 make her desolate, thus the abomination of desolation. In chapter 18 and verse 1, we read of an angel who is crying with a loud voice. Right in the heart of the nation entertained the papacy, the one who was given his seat by the dragon. See Revelation 13 and verse 2 and Revelation 17 and verse 3. This is an abomination, and in the book of Daniel 9 verse 27, we read that because of the overspreading of abominations, it shall be left desolate. What is the summary? The Pope and United Nations are working together to bring a new economic order. This foreign government is seeking to take over the United States, to do away with the Constitution and bring in a socialist government with a few elite rich ruling as kings and the equal distribution of bread and water to the poor slave class who are moved into these cities. But in the meantime, God's people are to be giving a loud cry to get out of Babylon, to get out of the cities. Just as when Jesus looked at Jerusalem, he said the following. Luke 19:41-42 says, "When he was come near, he beheld the city and wept over it, saying, If thou hadst known, even now, at least in this thy day, the things which belong unto thy peace, but now are they hid from thine eyes." He cried because they didn't know or understand. Just as many today have not known or understood when they see the abomination of desolation to get out of the cities. In Revelation 18, there is a call, a people weeping as did Jesus because many don't know or understand. These people are noted here in verse 1 and 2. "And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. There is a loud cry, and people weeping at this time, saying, If thou hadst known and understood, the 10 horns have made you desolate," Revelation 17:16, "and now judgment is come." And the next verse tells us why. Verse 3, "For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. She is fallen because of acquiring state power, and therefore the message is to flee out of the great city." The next verse reads in verse 4, "And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins, and that you receive not of her plagues." In Jeremiah chapter 51 and verse 6 we read, "Flee out of the midst of Babylon, and deliver every man his soul, and be not cut off in her iniquity. For this is the time of the Lord's vengeance. He will render unto her her recompense." In order to accomplish the means, some of the big banks merely have to collapse the economy, call in their loans, collect all of their houses and country homes, and the first to be collected will be the debtors. The Bible says, "Owe no man anything." When collection comes, many will be left homeless and forced into concentration camps similar to those that were in Nazi Germany. And out of all of this, the Socialist Sustainable Development Agenda 21 would be implemented, and the people would be forced out of the country. The right to private property would disappear, and the kings of the earth would rule for a short space before Jesus comes in the clouds. We are at the final moments before these things occur. God has given us time to flee out of Babylon, Jeremiah 51:6, to flee out of Judea, Matthew 24:16. And he has a people to give this call right now. Are you willing to heed the call and give this call to others? To flee out of New York City, to flee out of Los Angeles, to get out of the cities. Do you know and understand the time of visitation is just before us? Do you see the signs given and understand the instruction to flee out of the cities? Because when things go bad, the worst place to be at this time is in the cities. Jesus didn't just warn us for no reason. Be sure to like and share these videos so that others can recognize the seriousness of this message and follow the counsel laid out by Jesus, and also to subscribe and be updated when new videos are produced. Godspeed. This event, and he defends working with Kanye West, who said the following.
I sold my sold to the devil. I know it's a crappy deal. Disagree with a few toys like a Happy Meal.
Many of the people on the list for Together 2016 are also on the list for another event in September called the